Max Verstappen makes an unfortunate claim about Red Bull. Mercedes' performance is still nowhere after bouncing issues, and Leclerc gets fined for swearing. Do consider subscribing. Let's get straight into the latest F1 news. Charles Leclerc has been given a punishment by the FIA stewards in Brazil over his use of an expletive in a press conference. The Ferrari driver's use of the F word in the post-race press conference last weekend in Mexico has resulted in him being slapped with a $5,000 fine. Following his third-place finish in Mexico, Leclerc was addressing the media in the FIA press conference when he was asked about his dramatic wayward moment while defending against Lando Norris through the final corner. Leclerc had almost lost control of his Ferrari and narrowly avoided the barriers, and he replayed the incident via explanation as he addressed the question of what he'd said to himself as Norris went through to take second. "I don't know which face I did, but it had to be a pretty stressful one because when I lost it, I knew that I had to do everything perfect," Leclerc said. "I mean, Lando was so quick at that time. So again, I felt like it was a matter of laps, but I was still trying to do everything possible for him to overheat behind me and keep him as long as possible behind me. So, I tried to have the best exit possible. I could see that he was very close out of that corner. I lost the rear and then you forget about Lando, and you just hope that you are going to take it back. I had one oversteer, and then when I recovered from that oversteer, I had an oversteer from the other side, and then I was like, fuck." Realizing what he'd said, Leclerc laughed. "Oh, sorry. Oh no, I don't want to join Max." This was in reference to a recent incident in which Max Verstappen had referred to his Red Bull as being fucked in a press conference in Singapore as he spoke about the previous round in Baku. The incident resulted in Verstappen being summoned before the stewards and hit with a community service punishment, which will see him carry out work in the public interest as contrition. Verstappen was less than impressed by the punishment, clamming up in FIA press conferences for the rest of the weekend, and instead choosing to make his points via private media sessions in the Red Bull motorhome. Leclerc's transgression amused Mexico City GP winner Carlos Sainz, who asked his Ferrari teammate, "You have your wallet here?" as Leclerc looked around guiltily after using the word. Leclerc was reported to the stewards by the FIA media delegate, with the Ferrari driver summoned to discuss his vocabulary over the Brazilian GP weekend. The verdict, released on Friday evening in Brazil, was a fine of $10,000, $5,000 of this being suspended on the condition that there is no further breach of a similar nature within the next 12 months. The FIA stewards also explained why Leclerc was not given the same punishment as Verstappen. Despite both drivers being in breach of Article 12.2.1K of the FIA's International Sporting Code, ISC, related to misconduct. The stewards noted that the language was not directed at anyone or any group, and that Leclerc immediately apologized, read the verdict. During the hearing, Leclerc expressed his regret for his momentary lack of judgment and shared that he understood his responsibility as a role model for the sport. The stewards considered the mitigation factor that Leclerc was immediately apologetic. The stewards, while noting that the driver's contrite behavior, conclude that a breach has occurred and a penalty is warranted. The stewards do not consider that this breach reached the same level as the most recent case, e.g. Verstappen's, and as such chose to levy a fine of $10,000 with $5,000 suspended pending no repeat within 12 months. The clampdown on the use of bad language has come in recent months, following the addition of a broad any misconduct article in the ISC, with the FIA outlining that the policy of the governing body is to ensure that language used in its public forums, such as press conferences, meets generally accepted standards for all audiences and broadcasts. In particular, this is true of statements made by participants in the World Championships, and thus being role models both inside and outside the sport. This is clear in the regulations of the FIA, and has been reinforced through previous cases brought before the stewards. Red Bull Racing began the 2024 racing season with a lot of promise and energy, showing off a strong performance in the early races. However, as the season has progressed towards the middle, this initial speed has started to fade. Other teams have been able to find ways to enhance their cars with updates, gaining more pace and competing more effectively. This increased competition has understandably led to frustration for Red Bull Racing, and these feelings were very much alive as they approached the Brazilian Grand Prix at Interlagos. Max Verstappen faced a tough challenge during the recent sprint qualifying session, which placed him in 4th position for the upcoming race. As he stepped out of his car, he felt far from confident about the potential speed of his RB20, leaving him with doubts about his ability to secure a victory at the Brazilian Grand Prix. The reigning world champion expressed his concerns clearly after qualifying. Despite having qualified in a decent position for the shortened race the following day, he felt that the weekend might not turn out to be as fruitful as he had hoped. In his comments to the broadcasters after the sprint qualifying, Verstappen noted with concern that something seemed off from the very start of the qualifying process. He remarked on how difficult the conditions were, particularly due to the bumpy nature of the track surface at Interlagos. He mentioned that while the track had undergone resurfacing, the changes made seemed to have deteriorated the driving experience instead of improving it. Verstappen pointed out that the surface was extremely uneven, which was creating challenges for the performance of their cars. He explained that his car was bouncing significantly on the bumps, resulting in lost time on his laps, which was unfortunate for his overall performance in the qualifying. Although one difficult session doesn't automatically forecast a disappointing weekend, Verstappen remained skeptical about the prospects for improvement as the weekend progressed. When asked about the potential for better results in the sprint race, or the main event on Sunday, he responded ambiguously, conveying uncertainty. He pointed out that typically when a driver struggles with pace over the course of a qualifying lap, it's an indicator that they might not be particularly strong when it comes to the race itself. Verstappen acknowledged that they would have to wait and see how things unfolded in the sprint race. He also mentioned the possibility of inclement weather possibly affecting the races, although it seemed likely that the sprint would not be impacted by rain. Additionally, he noted that he had some work ahead of him concerning a grid penalty that would be in effect. This penalty refers to the 5-place grid drop Verstappen will face during the Sunday Grand Prix due to the replacement of certain components in his power unit. This added pressure means that regardless of his qualifying position, he would have to navigate this setback. For a driver who once dominated the sport, the 2024 season has become increasingly difficult. It has now been quite some time since Verstappen last enjoyed a victory in a Grand Prix, with his last win occurring in Spain back in late June. Though he had initially built a significant lead in the championship standings earlier this year, that lead has been gradually chipped away by Lando Norris of McLaren and, more recently, by Charles Leclerc of Ferrari. The situation has been further complicated by the struggles of Verstappen's teammate Sergio Perez, who has also faced difficulties behind the wheel, resulting in Red Bull Racing slipping to third place in the Constructors' Championship. Lewis Hamilton expressed that the first practice session at the Interlagos track brought back memories of the 2022 Azerbaijan Grand Prix. During that race, the phenomenon known as porpoising reached a significant peak, largely characterized by the challenges posed by the ground effect era of Formula One. He recalled that while this was a pressing concern for the Mercedes team at that time, the recent resurfacing of the Interlagos track has likely contributed to its bumpiness. After the practice session on Friday, he noted that several drivers had voiced their worries about the rough nature of the track surface. Hamilton also shared that he had experienced considerable discomfort on that particular Friday, reminiscent of the pain he felt during the Azerbaijan race. Back then, he openly admitted that the race was one of the hardest he had ever faced in his Formula One career, describing it as the worst race ever, and probably the most painful race that I've experienced. The severe bouncing issues that Mercedes dealt with on that occasion made for an extremely challenging experience on the track. Fortunately, since that time, the team has made significant strides in resolving many of those bouncing and porpoising problems. However, the freshly paved surface at Interlagos this year seemed to cause its own set of complications. Max Verstappen, among others, expressed dissatisfaction with the quality of the new asphalt, highlighting the overall bumpiness of the circuit that was affecting many of the drivers. During the first practice session in Brazil on Friday, Hamilton admitted that he was feeling pain as he dealt with the challenges of driving in tough conditions. Later, when it came time for the qualifying rounds, he found himself eliminated in SQ2, finishing in 11th place. His teammate at Mercedes, George Russell, fared slightly better, managing to qualify in 6th position for the upcoming race on Saturday. When asked about his performance after sprint qualifying, Hamilton commented, "Pretty bad, but the same as every qualifying for me." He was candid about his lack of confidence in the car, stating that it had been a significant struggle for him throughout the session. Hamilton described the overall ride on the track as quite poor, and he felt this was a common sentiment shared among the drivers. He pointed out that the resurfacing was not executed to an ideal standard, resulting in a bumpy experience for everyone involved in the race. He specifically compared the first practice session to his experiences in Baku back in 2022, noting how hard the car was hitting the ground as they sped down the straight sections. To mitigate this, the team made adjustments to the car's setup, allowing for slightly better handling, which lessened the severity of the bouncing and pain he was previously experiencing. Nevertheless, he mentioned that during the cornering phases of the laps, the car continued to bounce around, making it tricky to handle. He shrugged off some of the frustrations, stating, "It is what it is. It'll be what it will be." While he wasn't overly concerned about the current situation, he expressed a desire to improve his performance, noting that if he could advance during the sprint race, that would be a positive outcome. He also looked forward to qualifying again in the second session, indicating that he planned to make some alterations to the car in hopes of enhancing its performance as the race weekend progressed. A prominent Argentinian journalist has claimed Franco Colapinto to Red Bull is a done deal for F1 2025. The Argentinian driver is at the heart of late silly season speculation, with the Williams driver proving highly impressive as a rookie since replacing Logan Sargent after the summer break. With a vacant seat at the V-Carb squad for F1 2025, speculation has run rampant over who might slot into the seat alongside Yuki Tsunoda next season. Added to that speculation is the uncertainty over what's happening with Sergio Perez, as Red Bull advisor Helmut Marko has said. A decision on the main team's lineup will be made after this season. Perez has struggled for form and consistency throughout F1 2024, with his points score costing Red Bull a strong challenge for this year's Constructors' Championship, and the possibility of Perez being replaced has not been firmly denied by senior Red Bull figures. While Perez has put the message out that his 2-year contract extension with Red Bull, signed earlier this year, is watertight, team boss Christian Horner has spoken at length about how F1 is a results-based business. His comments following Perez's home race in Mexico notably failing to reassure Perez of his future with the team. With both Horner and Marko making it clear that Colapinto is of interest to Red Bull as an organization, PlanetF1.com understands Horner met with Williams team boss James Vowles on Friday to discuss securing the services of the Argentinian for the future. The Red Bull boss was spotted in the Williams motorhome on Friday, with Vowles later quipping that Horner had been there to sample the coffee of a new Williams partner. Later on Friday, Argentine journalist Ruben Duray posted on the A Todo Motor social media channel to claim Colapinto has already been signed by Red Bull. More than a month ago, A Todo Motor gave you the absolute scoop that Colapinto was going to be in Formula One until the end of the year, Duray said. Well, today is Friday, and I'm letting you know that at this moment, Colapinto is already Red Bull's number 2 driver for 2025. An exclusive scoop of A Todo Motor. I am really happy that an Argentinian, Franco Colapinto, is in a team as important as Red Bull. Further speculation was fueled via teasing posts on X by Red Bull Argentina and Bybit Argentina, a Red Bull racing sponsor. PlanetF1.com understands that, while negotiations to land Colapinto are underway, a Red Bull deal is nowhere close to completion, and even with all the pieces falling into place, sources have indicated a successful deal being made could take weeks to agree. The understanding is that Red Bull is not the only interested party in Colapinto's services, and that the other interested party is not Sauber, the only other team on the grid with a vacant seat for F1 2025, thus suggesting something of a tug-of-war is currently underway to secure Colapinto. The Argentinian, the first driver from his country since the lackluster Gaston Mazepin over 20 years ago, has scored 2 points finishes from his 5-race weekend so far, scoring 5 points to teammate Alex Albon's 12th. More pertinently, Colapinto has proven himself a close match for Albon and has even outperformed the more experienced British Thai racer despite his lack of preparation and seat time in the Williams. With Albon being a known quantity for Red Bull due to his background as a Red Bull driver for both teams and reserve, this sheds further insight into Colapinto's strengths to the squad and the perception of his quality. While Colapinto is of interest to Red Bull, sources have indicated it's not yet clear whether the intention is to secure the Argentinian for a seat with V-Carb or Red Bull Racing, further muddying the waters as the season winds down. Also of interest for Red Bull is the commercial aspect. Perez's wealthy backer Carlos Slim has indicated the possibility that his roster of companies is open to sponsoring Colapinto. With Red Bull recently announcing an expanded deal with fellow telecommunications firm AT&T for F1 2025, It is possible that Telmex will cease direct involvement with the Milton Keynes-based outfit to avoid having two competing sponsors attached to the team. A decision is expected to be taken next month, with Slim Domit confirming Telmex always intends to continue its sponsorship of PEREZ. He has raised the prospect of adding Colapinto to the company's portfolio, having previously backed the likes of Bruno Senna, Pietro Fittipaldi, and Esteban Gutierrez in addition to PEREZ. Quizzed on a potential link-up with Colapinto, Slim Domit told ESPN, "We have been with many drivers many times. If there was an opportunity to talk about something with Franco, it would not be anything related to Checo Perez. We always seek to support Latin American drivers. Franco is doing very well. But without a doubt, our important project has always been to continue building the development of Mexican drivers, and Checo, without a doubt, is the one who represents us all." Perez is expected to remain in the Red Bull cockpit until the end of the season, despite suggestions he could be replaced following the Brazilian Grand Prix. A new chassis for Red Bull didn't really help Sergio Perez improve his situation, as he ended up qualifying in 13th place for the sprint race taking place in Brazil. This result continues a string of disappointing performances for the driver. Perez has been struggling to find his form ever since a tough outing during the US Grand Prix held in Austin, where he faced challenges and did not perform well, followed by an even more disappointing home race in Mexico last weekend, where he finished in 17th position. The pressure on Perez is growing, and once again, there are questions about whether he will continue to be part of the Red Bull team next season, even though he does have a contract in place. When reporters asked him about his recent disappointing results, he listed several reasons he felt impacted his performance. He explained that during the first practice session, things seemed to be going well. However, as the temperatures on the track changed, he experienced some understeer, which made it difficult for him to handle the car. To try to manage the situation, he and the team attempted to adjust the brake balance and utilize other available tools to improve the handling of his car. Unfortunately, he ended up feeling that the car was too rear-limited, which complicated matters further. Perez also mentioned that there was a bit of confusion regarding their strategy. They thought they might have an opportunity for a second lap, but unfortunately did not capitalize on that chance. He admitted that the team struggled quite a lot that day and expressed hope for better results in the next day's qualifying session, noting that they were caught off guard by the changing track conditions, which added to their difficulties. Christian Horner, the team principal of Red Bull, previously mentioned that the team had gone back to using an older chassis in an effort to help Perez regain his confidence. While he reaffirmed his support for Perez, he did not offer an emphatic statement of confidence. He stated that the team is putting forth their best efforts to help rebuild the driver's confidence, particularly after what he described as a terrible weekend in Mexico. Horner pointed out that the decision to switch to an older chassis was made to give Perez that necessary boost of confidence. He acknowledged that Perez is an experienced driver who has been in the racing world long enough to understand that this sport is heavily focused on results. Horner emphasized that Sergio is very much aware that this season has not been up to his usual standards, and he is certainly aware of that fact more than anyone else. However, Horner assured that the team is doing everything possible to support him during this challenging period. In the meantime, Perez's teammate Max Verstappen qualified in 4th place and will start in the second row for the sprint race. The reigning world champion also shared his concerns about the challenges posed by the bumpy track. He remarked that as soon as qualifying started, it was clear that they were not performing at their best. He described the car as being difficult to handle due to the bumps on the track. Verstappen explained that although some resurfacing work was done, it unfortunately made the situation worse for driving. He pointed out that the extreme bumpiness of the track was affecting the performance of their cars, with the vehicle jumping around a lot in the bumpy areas, which consequently cost him valuable lap time. Verstappen noted that usually, if a driver struggles with pace over a single lap, it could indicate difficulties during the race as well. He expressed uncertainty about how the race would play out the following day in the sprint, but was mindful that there could be some potential weather changes on the horizon, which may also impact their performance, although it was unclear if this would affect the sprint itself. Thanks for watching. I'll see you around.